Well, there was a whole lot of finger-pointing today over the anti-tariff ad that has ground Canada-U.S. trade negotiations to a halt. While U.S. President Donald Trump is blaming the ad for ending those talks, Conservative Leader Pierre Poilievre is blaming, who else? Prime Minister Mark Carney.
The reality is that premiers are stepping up to fill the void left behind by Mark Carney's broken promise. He said he would negotiate a win. He said he would have a deal by July 21st. Still no deal. Now Mark Carney is looking for someone to blame for his broken promises, and he's blaming an ad that he approved.
Meanwhile, some premiers say they think this is all just Donald Trump being Donald Trump.
In terms of the ups and downs of what we've been living through this year, I would say this is pretty par for the course of what we've come to expect from the president, and we need to keep pushing.
I can tell you one thing, if it wasn't this, he'd pick something else that he wasn't happy with. And, negotiations been going on month after month after month. We need to sit down and start focusing on it, in my opinion. I'd take a no deal instead of a bad deal.
So all of this, and in exactly 1 week, the Carney government will deliver its first budget. So how will all of this uncertainty shape Canada's financial future? Well, the Power Panel, luckily, is here to talk about all of that. Michelle Cadario was Deputy Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Cheryl Oates was Director of Communications for former Alberta NDP Premier Rachel Notley. And Shachi Kurl is the President of the Angus Reid Institute. Good to see you all. Michelle, having worked for former Finance Minister and Prime Minister Paul Martin, have you ever had to do a budget under these kinds of circumstances? I mean, when you look at the economic headwinds hitting Canada, how do you even begin to plot a fiscal path forward?
Well, actually, we did. It was a different set of circumstances, but, in the 90s, when we were saddled with a huge deficit and growing debt, and we had the bond markets kind of at our heels, wanting to essentially declare us bankrupt as a country, there was enormous pressure on the government at the time. And, I think that Mr. Chrétien and Mr. Martin, when they came in, they hardly came in on a deficit-fighting kind of agenda or what they want. That wasn't necessarily what they wanted to do, but it was what they had to do. And, good governments make difficult decisions in tough times. And so, I think that, Prime Minister Carney is setting himself up to make some big, bold decisions if what we're hearing is correct. And he's been talking about, a generational spend. And, in these winds that we're facing and such uncertainty on our trading relationships, that I think that he's trying to bet on Canada. And it's a long-term bet. It's not going to change overnight. And I think that he's hoping that Canadians are going to stick with him as he goes through it. So, but he's got some communicating to do. That's all what I would say.
Well, that's a recurring theme in a lot of the conversations in this town. Lisa, I'm wondering what you make of what we're seeing in terms of the blame game. I don't know if Mark Carney had to approve Doug Ford's ad. I know he saw it in a meeting with Premier Ford, is what senior Ontario people are telling us. Didn't object to it, but neither did Donald Trump, first of all. This political finger-pointing in the face of it, Donald Trump is ultimately the actor here. What do you make of the dynamic that we're seeing?
Well, Donald Trump may be the actor here, but the victim is Canadian business. Mm-hmm. And I'm not appreciative of all the noise around who did what when. The reality of the situation, as I see it, David, is that real live decisions are being made by real businesses in this country about whether or not they are going to move their operation to some state in the United States. Yeah. Family offices are looking at it, small and medium-sized businesses are, because the signal they're not getting from federal and provincial government is that they actually have an idea of how to proceed through this dilemma in a careful way that's going to end up being okay at the end. There's so much uncertainty right now in the business sector, especially in small and medium-sized businesses. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before. It is really jarring to hear ordinary Canadian business people say, I think I really got to think about closing up shop here and moving to the States because I don't know where this is all going to end.
Yeah, and Cheryl, like Michelle's right, the size of the challenge they faced in the 90s, but it was a known set of facts, right? A debt to GDP burden and a debt that you had to attack, and trade with the U.S. was about to lift off. We don't know where trade with the U.S. is going, and I wonder, to Lisa's point, do you think what we're seeing politically is a good thing for the economic health of the country as people have to make these decisions.
Well, I don't think it's a good strategy to get us to our end goal, which ultimately is a good deal for Canadians and a good deal for Canadian businesses. As you said, right now, a whole bunch of finger pointing and whose fault was it that Donald Trump did this and whose fault was it on this day that Donald Trump did that. And what we need is a strategic reset away from the grandstanding loop. Everybody right now, whether you're a union leader, a trade association, a premier, the prime minister, everybody wants to take their political points from who stood up to Donald Trump best and who made the most progress and who stood up for their members or their constituents. And that has cost us, in this case, our negotiating position. And so rather than talk about whose fault it was in any given scenario, it's time for us to start talking about how we move forward and what we're going to do differently. And in some cases, that might be a little bit more information sharing. Like it could be the case that if the Prime Minister were to read some of the premiers in a little bit, they might be less inclined to take matters into their own hands. But we do need a little bit of a look at what's not worked so far and what we can do better if we're working towards a strategic goal and not just political points.
Shachi, it does remind me of sort of the dynamic we saw at the beginning of the year when Justin Trudeau was still Prime Minister, and kind of there's this scattershot approach of different premiers doing different things. And, you know, in the run-up to an election, you're going to see a lot of politics, but it wasn't coordinated, right? It was five fingers instead of a fist. And I wonder if that's where we're maybe headed back.
Well, I think there's a couple of things that we're being asked to react to without having the full picture of, first of all, where Americans are. How many Americans actually watched that ad? Did it change any minds? Did it rile up enough American viewers to say, look, I'm gonna call my local politician, I'm gonna call my congressman or my state official and really pressure them? We don't know that. We're in the process of finding that out, but we don't know that yet. As to what's happened with the 10%, look, I am not somebody who's going to leap to the defense of Doug Ford. When you look up an antonym for, as Lisa pointed out, sort of careful progress or careful, thoughtful process, Doug Ford is not the poster child for that. We know that about him, but we also know that he plays a role, whether it's in Ontario or whether it's even at the national level, of being sort of the elbow in the elbows up. And at this stage, if you talk about the politics of it, that is not going to hurt him, because as much as we know that certain sectors are really, really hurting, and let me be clear, one household affected by this situation is one household too many. But when we ask Canadians, have you suffered job loss? Have you suffered reduced work hours? Are you worried about that? The vast majority at this stage of people in this country say the answer is no. Where you see the highest level is in Ontario, and at that level it's about 5%. That's not nothing. That means a tremendous amount to those families who are losing work or out of work as a result of what's happening. But it's not so many that people have shifted from that elbows up mindset mentality, and beyond that, I think they are at a point where the antipathy towards Donald Trump, the hostility in Canada among the Canadian rank and file towards Donald Trump is such that they're not likely to blame Canadian politicians for this. They're much more likely to blame Trump for this.
Yeah, well, yes, because he started it.
And you're talking to me, I can't hear you anymore.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, Shachi has lost the ability to hear me, Controller. I'm just letting you know that. All right, Michelle, Shachi makes a good point that people broadly are not feeling it as acutely as some of the key sectors, probably because of the preservation of the CUSMA exemption, right, which allows a lot of trade to keep going. But, you talk to people and the future order books are getting a lot worse, right? And now you're seeing the anxiety and the frustration there. So, Michelle, if you're the Prime Minister, and we've heard people talk about information sharing, what do you think the next move needs to be when Mark Carney gets back from Asia?
Well, I got to say that I think that the end of Shachi's sentence was yet. And that's what really worries me. And I think that, the government is kind of trying to not take for granted that where we are today, but trying to look to where we might be tomorrow. And, CUSMA, I think we should all recognize, is probably very much in jeopardy, and not something that we can kind of count on to be renegotiated, and certainly not at the current kind of level of enjoyment that we have right now. So, I think that this budget is going to, it's a defining feature for Mark Carney as a politician, as a prime minister. There are such high expectations on it from so many different sectors. I think that the pressure to actually get it passed, which, I'm not sure that there's a 100% guarantee of that they've worked through, but also to meet the demand that he's kind of set out there is going to be enormous. And so I hope that they've dug in and done their homework and are ready to really go out and sell this budget, because if Canadians accept the budget and Canadians accept the path, then I think that it will pass in the House without a problem.
Yeah, we're going to talk to Don Davies, the interim leader of the NDP, about this, because they're getting some pressure from a lot of groups on what to do. But Lisa, I think we got a sense, like not a lot of granular specifics, but in the speech the Prime Minister gave last week, sort of explaining the size of the challenge. I mean, it's something you've heard before, I've heard before, but he's trying to bundle it together, I guess, before he went to Asia about this is the size of the challenge, so this is why we're going to have a massive eye-popping deficit, is sort of what I took away from it. Do you think the country is ready for that? Kind of the need to go deeper and deeper into the red, though not at a COVID level, but not far off?
Yeah, what I hope the country is ready for is to understand exactly the gravity of the situation is vis-a-vis our trading partner to the south, the United States of America, and what it means for domestic policies here. Yeah. And it's not just focused on the deficit. It's not about a spend budget. What Mr. Carney is hearing from the Asian investors that he's meeting with overseas is that it's not a problem with money. There is money in this world to invest in Canada. The problem with Canada is that we have too much regulatory red tape and uncertainty with respect to whether or not projects get built in this country, that they don't want to put any money into even developing a project because they're just flushing $1 billion down the toilet. That is something the government can actually do at very little cost. And that's what I'm going to be looking for.
Well, Cheryl, it does seem like this will be a whole new chapter for the early days of the Prime Minister and his government, because, as Shachi points out, I don't know if Canadians are going to blame him for things that Trump does, because I think the world realizes Trump is maybe an unsolvable problem, right? But the things he can control, which is the other part of his pitch to Canadians, we'll start to see the plan for that on November 4th in the budget. And that's where we start to see the domestic agenda at scale, potentially.
Yeah, I think it presents a really big challenge and a really big opportunity. The challenge, of course, is that there is so much unknown. And when we talk about economic impact and what our bottom line should brace for and what our ongoing negotiation means with the United States, you've seen this in provincial budgets across the country, that everybody is trying to anticipate this differently. You can try to bake in numbers, you can try to put in padding, but truthfully, this is all unknown. And it would be unknown even if we thought we were moving towards reaching a deal. The big opportunity is, of course, faced with this kind of unprecedented moment in our relationship with the United States. Mark Carney has political cover to do giant things, to steer the ship in a whole different direction in a way that you typically don't, even if you are a government with a new mandate. Not that he's not, but he is a continued Liberal government. He has this political cover to change big things, to make big spends, to do things that this government hasn't done before. And not to say that the public will blindly accept that, but they might be more willing to consider it given the situation that Canada is currently in.
Shachi, is that what you're seeing as you do your work, that he does have political cover, to use Cheryl's phrase, to do giant things? Do you think that's where the public sentiment is right now?
Well, certainly on Lisa's points around building big things, on doing resource development, it's unprecedented levels of support when you go back relative to the last 10, 15 years. We're seeing people who in the past would have been very reticent, resistant, unsure of whether that's a direction in which Canada should be going, who are now saying, just get it done already. In some ways, the hardest and the easiest thing for Mark Carney to do will be to actually dare the Conservative caucus to say, hey, I've put together all of these things. I'm going to say yes on these projects. And I dare you to vote against me. From a parliamentary perspective, you know, he will have the votes, but from a political perspective and the gamesmanship perspective, I think that is a harder conversation, and particularly vis-a-vis Quebec and the BQ, where we still see the highest levels of resistance to some of these major project ideas. But even there, approaching 50% of people in the province saying, yeah, like, get it done.
It's interesting, though, Michelle, as you navigate these things. I mean, you know, the Bloc and the Conservatives obviously have to stake out hard positions on this. But, you know, Melissa Lanson was here last week repeating the Leader's demand that the deficit needs to be down to about $40 billion for them to support this budget, or to be happy with this budget. There's no path to that with the needs and with the plans and with the economic certainty unless you shut down whole chunks of the government.
Well, and you know, there is the whole kind of splitting up the budget of the capital versus operating, and so, you know, is there some wiggle room in there, because, you know, the operating budget and the path that they want to set out upon to actually balance that within 3 years. You know, it's kind of like your mortgage and your credit card. You want to pay off your credit card so you're not paying ridiculous fees, but you can invest in an asset in a mortgage. And that's the long-term capital budget that the Prime Minister is going to set out. So I wonder if there's some room in there. You know, I don't think that Canadians, and you know, Shashi would probably know this better, but I don't think Canadians would take it well if we're hurled back into an election campaign. That is not on the calendar for most people, nor do I think that they would believe that that is going to have a satisfactory or different result.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it well. I'm still not recovered from the last one. But you know, Lisa, on the budget, the deficit, the size of it, you know, the capital operating split, however you want to go with that. I talked to Frances Donald last week, who always has a lot of smart things to say on this. She says a lot of the people are going to be looking at it. It's not so much the size of the deficit as what are you buying with that debt? Are you buying productivity? Are you buying the economic transformation? I know you talked about regulatory burden, and they seem to be alive to that. What do you think you need to see in the spending a week from today that let you know they're actually buying a productivity boost?
So what the rating agencies are going to be looking for, picking up on what Frances Donald said, is they're going to be making sure that the government has a plan to not have these continuous large deficits, that, as she said, these kinds of investments are going to actually give you revenues that are going to be able to, in the future, allow you to pay down the debt and hopefully get to a deficit position. But I always start with the very fact that I don't accept the fact that the current government budget as it stands right now is all good money, that it's all good spend. I think there's an opportunity to take a look internally and see exactly what are we spending it on. And instead of thinking about how much more we're piling onto it, let's think about what is it in this deficit right now that we truly don't need. I mean, we may want it, sorry, but do we actually need it? Because we're entering into a world where scarcity is real, and we're going to be able to make sure that we're putting our money in places that make sense for the future. I heard a speech yesterday by my outgoing CEO, Victor Dodig, and he said, if you think that the last 10 years was a lost decade, if we continue and have another 10 years of loss of opportunity, then we're actually undermining an entire generation. And that's what's at stake.
Yeah, and Cheryl, like there is the process underway for some sort of budget rationalization, but whether it's at the size and scale that will satisfy, you know, bond readers and others, I don't know. But with all of the challenges and with the spend and with the need to do some sort of rationalization, it's got to be packaged with this narrative of it will all be worth it in the end, and here's why, right? And that's a hard thing to see right now with the industries, key industries under assault.
Yeah, and I mean, this budget has so many promises. We've promised austerity, we've promised growth, we've promised diversification, we've been promised efficiencies. The government has a lot to live up to. And when it comes to efficiencies, like I've been a part of a government that is trying to find efficiencies, much easier said than done. When you ask ministers to go scrape through their ministries and find things that they don't need to be spending money on, it is hard to come up with substantial, meaningful amounts of money that you are willing to take out of your budget, that you're willing to sacrifice. And so that is a difficult exercise. And then I think when it comes to demonstrating that the spend or the deficit is worth it, yeah, again, a really really big task to take on. How do you demonstrate to Canadians that under threat from what was our closest trading partner, that we're doing what it takes for Canada to eventually become more resilient or more economically secure? And how do you tell them how that will impact their lives today if the budget is passed? That is a really tall order, and it's what it will take to get other parties to support it.
But, you know, Shachi, on that, on the reduction side of things, I remember in the mid-2000s when I was still a provincial political reporter back in St. John's, they were going through a cost-cutting exercise in the first Danny Williams budget when they had won, and you're sitting around a cabinet table talking about, and you really feel it at a provincial level, cutting programs that give low-income seniors eyeglasses. You know, that's the kind of choices you have to make. And I wonder, with the Trump effect and with all of the economic uncertainty, whether there's a political climate where you can make those kind of cuts in a federal budget if you start having people losing out as a result of it.
It's an interesting question. I think the rear view lens on this gives this government a little bit of cover, in that it's not so many years ago that we went through the pandemic where money, rightly so, flowed quickly in great quantity and freely out the door in order to help backstop people who were being plunged into crisis at the household level with job loss and an economy that was basically, stopped all at once. But looking back then, a lot of folks realizing, what was it, the COVID checks that were going to kids living in their parents' basements and that kind of thing. And so people will have some recollection of ways that money, when it needs to be spent quickly, is perhaps not always spent best. And I think that's something that they can sort of refer back on. And beyond that, crisis has a way of bringing people together and being in a more amenable mood to follow a crisis leader. So if the Prime Minister, if the Finance Minister can turn this into their hell or high water moment and say, look, we're going to do this, you need to come with us because everything is at stake, I do think you will find a significant amount of goodwill around that. The politics are always going to be the politics around the edges, but the responsibility is to, number one, leverage that moment, but number two, not screw it up by doing the unnecessary or the stupid spending.